Madonna was 5 years old when she watched her mother die from breast cancer. That loss shaped everything she would become. The fearlessness, the provocation, the desperate need to be seen. 60 years later, standing on stage in front of 80,000 fans, Madonna dedicated Like a Prayer to her mother and broke down completely. This is the story of how a 5-year-old's grief became the fuel for a legend, and how even 6 decades later, that little girl still mourns for her mother. It was December 1st, 2023, at Madison Square Garden in New York City. Madonna was performing as part of her celebration tour, a career-spanning retrospective marking 40 years in the music industry. The arena was packed with 20,000 fans who had come to celebrate the Queen of Pop's incredible legacy. But what none of them knew was that this particular date held devastating significance for Madonna. Exactly 60 years earlier, on December 1st, 1963, her mother, Madonna Louise Fortin Ciccone, had died from breast cancer at the age of 30, leaving behind 6 young children and a grief-stricken husband. The youngest of those children, 5-year-old Madonna Louise Ciccone, would spend the next 6 decades trying to process a loss that fundamentally shaped who she would become. Madonna's last clear memory of her mother was in a hospital room. She was 5 years old, standing beside her mother's bed, not fully understanding what dying meant, but knowing that something terrible was happening. Her mother, weak from cancer and the brutal treatments of 1963, had tried to comfort her children even as she was slipping away. Madonna remembered her mother's voice, thin and exhausted, telling her to be strong, to take care of her younger siblings, to be a good girl. What 5-year-old Madonna couldn't process was the finality of death. She kept expecting her mother to come home from the hospital. When the funeral happened, she thought it was temporary. She waited for her mother to walk through the door, to tuck her into bed, to be there like mothers were supposed to be. But her mother never came home, and that absence, that gaping hole where maternal love should have been, became the defining wound of Madonna's life. Years later, Madonna would describe that period with brutal honesty. "When my mother died, I was introduced to the concept of grief and abandonment. I was too young to understand death, but I understood that she was gone and I was alone." After her mother's death, Madonna's father remarried quickly, too quickly for the grieving children to process. The new stepmother tried her best, but she wasn't their mother, and the household became tense with unspoken grief and resentment. Madonna, the oldest girl, was expected to take on maternal responsibilities for her younger siblings. At 6, 7, 8 years old, she was changing diapers, cooking meals, trying to be the mother she'd lost. But inside, she was still a little girl, desperate for the love and attention that had been ripped away from her. She acted out, seeking attention through any means necessary. She became the class clown, the troublemaker, the girl who would do anything to be noticed. "I think I've been trying to fill that void my entire life," Madonna said in a later interview. "The void of not having a mother's unconditional love. I've been searching for it, in relationships, in my children, in my art, in the love of millions of fans, but nothing quite fills it." As Madonna grew older, her mother's death transformed from a wound into a weapon. The fear of being forgotten, of disappearing the way her mother had disappeared, drove her to become unforgettable. She became obsessed with control because she couldn't control losing her mother. She became provocative because she refused to be invisible. She became relentless in her pursuit of fame because being famous meant being remembered, and being remembered meant never truly dying. Every boundary Madonna pushed, every controversy she courted, every reinvention she underwent, all of it traced back to that 5-year-old girl who'd learned too early that life was fragile and love could vanish without warning. "My mother's death gave me an iron will," Madonna once said. "It gave me a sense that I had to be my own person because I couldn't depend on having a mother to guide me. I had to figure everything out myself." In 1989, Madonna released Like a Prayer, a song that became one of her biggest hits and most controversial moments. The music video, with its religious imagery and provocative themes, sparked outrage and cemented Madonna's reputation as a boundary pusher. But what most people didn't understand was what the song really meant to Madonna. Like a Prayer wasn't just about religious ecstasy or sexual liberation. It was, at its core, a conversation with her dead mother. The lyrics, "When you call my name, it's like a little prayer. I'm down on my knees, I wanna take you there," were Madonna's way of reaching across 6 decades of silence to connect with the woman who'd left her when she was 5. Life is a mystery. Everyone must stand alone. That line came directly from Madonna's childhood realization that her mother's death meant she was fundamentally alone in the world. "I hear you call my name, and it feels like home." That was the fantasy, the impossible wish that her mother's voice could somehow reach her again. Every time Madonna performed Like a Prayer, she was performing a ritual, trying to conjure a connection with the mother she'd lost and spent 60 years mourning. As December 1st, 2023 approached, Madonna's team was concerned. The 60th anniversary of her mother's death falling on a concert date seemed like a cruel coincidence. They offered to reschedule, to give Madonna space to grieve privately. But Madonna refused. "I need to do this," she told them. "I need to sing for her. I've been singing for her my entire career, but I've never done it publicly, explicitly. It's time." The decision terrified her. For 6 decades, Madonna had been in control of her image, her emotions, her public presentation. Breaking down on stage, showing genuine vulnerability, went against everything she'd built her career on. But she was 65 years old, looking back on a life shaped by loss, and she realized that control was just another way of running from grief. It was time to stop running. When Madonna took the stage at Madison Square Garden that December night, she seemed different. Her usual commanding presence was softened by something else, a vulnerability that her longtime fans had never seen before. She performed hit after hit, commanding the stage with her usual precision, but everyone who knew her could sense that something was building, some emotional crescendo that was approaching. Finally, about 90 minutes into the show, Madonna spoke to the audience in a way she'd never done before. "Tonight is a special night," she said, her voice already beginning to waver. "Exactly 60 years ago today, I lost my mother. I was 5 years old. She died from breast cancer at 30 years old, and I've spent every day since then trying to process that loss." The arena went completely silent. This level of personal revelation was unprecedented for Madonna. "Everything I've become, good and bad, came from losing her," Madonna continued. "The ambition, the need to be seen, the fear of being forgotten, the inability to trust, the constant reinvention, all of it traces back to being 5 years old and watching my mother disappear." Tears were streaming down her face now, but she kept talking. "I'm going to sing a song for her now. A song I wrote 34 years ago as a prayer to reach her. I've performed it thousands of times, but I've never dedicated it to her publicly. Tonight, on the 60th anniversary of losing her, I'm finally going to say what I should have said decades ago. Mum, this is for you." As the opening organ notes of Like a Prayer began, Madonna stood center stage, visibly shaking. This wasn't a performance anymore. It was an exorcism, a public grieving, a 60-year conversation finally spoken aloud. "When you call my name, it's like a little prayer," Madonna sang, but her voice was breaking. She was 5 years old again, calling for her mother in the night, and getting only silence. "I'm down on my knees, I want to take you there." She was literally on her knees now, the grief that she'd controlled for 6 decades finally overwhelming her defenses. The crowd began singing along, their voices lifting Madonna's faltering vocals, creating a communal moment of grief and support. 20,000 people were witnessing Madonna at her most vulnerable, and instead of judgment, they offered love. "In the midnight hour, I can feel your power," Madonna sang through tears. This was the fantasy, the impossible wish, that her mother's love could still reach her across 60 years of separation. Her backup singers, many of whom had worked with Madonna for years, were crying too. The band was struggling to maintain composure. The cameras capturing the moment showed something unprecedented. Madonna completely, authentically broken by grief. Halfway through the song, Madonna couldn't continue. She stood center stage, sobbing, unable to sing. The band kept playing, the crowd kept singing, but Madonna was lost in her grief. One of her dancers approached and put a hand on her shoulder. Madonna looked up, tears streaming down her face, and found the strength to continue. "Life is a mystery. Everyone must stand alone," she sang, and everyone in that arena understood that this wasn't just a lyric anymore. It was Madonna's lived experience, the truth she'd learned at 5 years old and never forgotten. I hear you call my name, and it feels like home. This was the heartbreak. Madonna had spent 60 years trying to feel at home in a world without her mother, and she'd never quite managed it. By the time the song ended, there wasn't a dry eye in Madison Square Garden. This wasn't entertainment. It was a sacred moment, a daughter's public goodbye to a mother she'd lost 6 decades earlier. After the show, Madonna was emotionally exhausted, but also strangely at peace. For 60 years, she'd carried her mother's death as a private wound, a secret grief that fueled her public persona, but was never directly acknowledged. By finally dedicating Like a Prayer to her mother, by breaking down publicly, by showing the vulnerable 5-year-old who still lived inside the 65-year-old superstar, Madonna had finally begun to heal something that had been broken since 1963. "I've spent my entire career being strong, being in control, being untouchable," she told her team afterward. "But my mother's death taught me that we can't control everything, we can't prevent loss, we can't avoid grief. All we can do is survive it, and hopefully, eventually, honor it." In the days after the performance, Madonna spoke more openly about her mother than she ever had before. She shared photos of Madonna Louise Fortin that she'd kept private for decades. She talked about the mother she'd known for only 5 years but had mourned for 60. "My mother was beautiful, kind, and deeply religious," Madonna said in an interview. "She loved music, she sang to me, she made me feel safe, and then she was gone, and I've spent my entire life trying to recreate that feeling of safety and never quite finding it." She also spoke about how her mother's death had shaped her relationships with her own children. "I'm terrified of them losing me the way I lost my mother. I'm probably overprotective because I know how devastating that loss can be. But I also try to show them that grief doesn't have to destroy you, it can transform you into someone stronger." Madonna's performance of Like a Prayer for her mother became one of the most talked about moments of her career. Clips of her breaking down on stage went viral, but the response was overwhelmingly compassionate. People related to the complexity of grief, to the way childhood trauma shapes adult lives, to the reality that no amount of success or fame can fill the void left by losing a parent too young. The performance also changed how people understood Madonna's entire career. Suddenly the provocation, the boundary pushing, the relentless reinvention all made sense as expressions of grief and survival. "Madonna has been telling us about her mother's death her entire career," one music critic wrote. "We just weren't listening. Every song about loss, every image of maternal longing, every moment of vulnerability quickly covered by armor. It was all about that 5-year-old girl who lost her mother and spent 60 years trying to process it." Madonna continued to perform Like a Prayer on the rest of her tour, and while she didn't break down every time, she dedicated each performance to her mother. The song had transformed from a hit single into a memorial, a nightly ritual of remembrance and healing. She also started speaking more publicly about childhood grief and the long-term impacts of early loss. She partnered with organizations supporting children who'd lost parents, using her platform to advocate for grief counseling and support services. "If I can help even one child process their grief better than I did," Madonna said, "then maybe my mother's death and my 60 years of struggling with it will have some meaning beyond just my personal pain." Madonna's story reminds us that grief doesn't have a timeline. 60 years after her mother's death, she was still mourning, still processing, still trying to understand how that loss shaped her life. But it also shows that it's never too late to honor that grief, to acknowledge it publicly, to stop running from it and instead let it be seen. Madonna's breakdown on stage wasn't weakness, it was courage. It was a woman finally allowing herself to be the grieving child she'd never been permitted to be. Today, Madonna often speaks about her mother with love, sadness, and acceptance. She's made peace with the fact that she'll never stop missing the woman who died when she was 5, but she's also grateful for how that loss shaped her into someone strong enough to survive it. "My mother's death made me who I am," Madonna says now. Not just the ambitious, driven, successful parts, but also the parts that can love deeply, grieve honestly, and find beauty in survival. "I wish I'd had her longer, but I'm grateful for the 5 years I did have, and for the 60 years of carrying her memory that taught me how strong love can be, even when it's only a memory." Every time Madonna performs Like a Prayer now, it's not just a song, it's a prayer, a memorial, A conversation across 6 decades of silence with a woman who died too young, but whose love shaped a legend. If this powerful story of loss, survival and healing moved you, subscribe and hit that thumbs up button. Share with anyone who's experienced the loss of a parent and understands that grief never truly ends. Have you lost someone who shaped who you became? Let us know in the comments, and ring that notification bell for more incredible true stories about the experiences that transform us.